Okay guys, so in this video we're going to go ahead and build our global navigation, local navigation, and the footer navigation. But before we get started, let's talk about the 5 pitfalls with navigation in the first place.
Alright, so in this video, what we want to do, I'm going to break this video up into several different sections. The first section, we'll just go through this quickly, this PowerPoint deck that's going to talk about the 5 common pitfalls with building a SharePoint navigation or building a SharePoint navigation strategy. So we'll get through the deck. After the deck, let's take another look at our modern intranet. I will go off and build a navigation for the global navigation, give a sample of what a local navigation would look like, and also throw some links in the footer navigation. And let's talk about those 3 components, right? Because now you have a lot of different areas to drive, navigation or browsing or helping the end user find things. Each one of those serve a different purpose, the global, the local, and the footer, and let's talk about that so that way we can really tighten up our strategy. So first things first, let's go ahead and get through this deck. So the number 5 pitfall is that the navigation is stale, right? So these navigations or really intranets in general, have been built over the years. We get revamped or we upgrade SharePoint. And depending on the organization, they may take different approaches. Some organizations, to get from SharePoint 07 to 2010, they just kind of do this content database migration, and then whatever they had in 07 is the same thing they have in 2010, and it's the same thing they'll have when they upgrade to 2013, so on and so forth. So most of these navigations just kind of stick around from their initial inception and you just kind of carry your way through. Well, in the meantime, over that time period, your organization has changed. I mean, they have different priorities. They may have a different market share. They may have different products and services. They may have different acquisitions. So, a lot of these navigations are just not updated at the same pace that these organization changes or the priorities change to kind of reflect those changes in the nav and present the information that's represented by these changes up to the forefront on the intranet. So most of the time things get stale, they become unusable, and really and that's another thing. Like, we're not going to talk about roles and responsibility, but sometimes there's no one identify who's responsible for the global nav and who's taking the ownership of keeping it updated based on the changes and all this other good stuff. So it's one of those afterthoughts and one that kind of get missed pretty frequently, pretty often. Number 4. Most navigations, when they're initially made or initially built, are done in a vacuum. Usually it's 1 or 2 people in the organization. There's probably one person, part of that other 2 or the 3, that really understands the company, been with the company for a while, understands where the various departments are, where you go for different types of information. And it's really and there's nothing wrong with that. I mean, their knowledge is great, but everything is from their perspective, right? They don't really have a pulse on what the real world tasks or common asks are for the various departments. So having this done in a vacuum is probably the worst way to go, because to really represent a global navigation that's going to be on the top of each and every one of your pages in your intranet, you want to have a representation from the various departments. So maybe HR should definitely be in the room. Someone from HR and maybe several departments within HR, especially if they split benefits from payroll and so on and so forth. You want to have a representation there from HR, because I think those are probably some of the most common asks. IT is another good representation, especially those groups that deal with device requests or help desk ticketing, password resets. Anyone that are kind of like the front, head of line or front of line type of defense for servicing employees of the organization. You want to have a representation of that group. The other parts of the group really depends on the larger size, like which department is going to be the largest department or the key department within your organization. Is it going to be, for Tesla, for example, maybe someone on the shop floor that's actually working with the vehicles and assembling the vehicles or inspecting the vehicles, or even from an engineering standpoint, so maybe a representation of that department. Or if you're a sales-oriented organization, maybe someone or several people from your sales department or your field sales reps and, international, so on and so forth. So, it's just one of those things where You just want to make sure that however your organization is structured, you have key representation from those various departments, and everyone kind of give their perspective on what the employee is looking for. So that's number 4. Number 3, I've seen this a lot. Is these links are labeled after the application versus the purpose of the application. So, for example, like some of these common healthcare providers or payroll service providers or like Paycor, they have put a link in there that's called Paycor. Well, most of the people don't know what Paycor mean. Yeah, maybe when I was going through orientation, it was hammered in Paycor for set up your W-2, Paycor to set up the number of exemptions you have, all this other good stuff. Paycor. But over time that may fade, or you may switch vendors and that doesn't still have the same representation or branding. That's the payroll piece of it. What you really want to do is focus your navigation on the purpose or the task, and that gives you a couple benefits. One, it gives you wiggle room to switch vendors without having a huge impact. Yeah, you're going to have to log in and all this other good stuff, but that link that says payroll or benefits or vision or dental is all going to be the same, but the link, the URL may point to somewhere else. So you kind of keep things intact in that way. And then also the purpose just is more meaningful for new hires, people who's been there for a while, consultants that may come in that may have to interact with timesheet reporting or things along those lines. They don't have to be accustomed to the vendor name versus I just want to submit a timesheet. All right. So number 2, this is I think all the previous pitfalls kind of are wrapped into this umbrella here. Everything should be in the context of the employee. If you look at the SharePoint lookbook, and there is actually a navigation module that talks about best practices and some of the key guidelines to follow when building your navigation, you will see that putting things in the context of the employee would make things more discoverable, would make it more findable, and it just starts to make sense. So if you have representation from the various departments, if you're naming things on the purpose of, payroll benefits versus the vendor names, and if you're keeping this thing up to date to kind of follow of where the company is shifting, where the company is going, everything should, kind of falls into that context of the employee. And then number 1, it's probably the biggest pitfall, is that there is no navigation strategy. We kind of just default with the organization structure of the company. And this is just, bad in many different scenarios. And it's bad over time, right? Because initially, because I even done it, like when I first got into SharePoint back in 2007, 2008, that's one of the things, like if, when you're doing your information architecture and you're figuring out your site structure and your navigation links and your metadata and all this other good stuff, we would default to the org structure. But over time, we noticed that that's not a good strategy. And I think this is another reason why Microsoft is going flat with the hierarchy within site collections versus one site collection with many, many subsites. And it's not the capacity of the site collection, because, even on-prem, just kind of getting a little geeky here. We know on-prem that a site collection can be bound across, one content database, and content databases have best practices as far as storage space, like that 100 gig was like the magic number when we were managing this on-prem. Well, since then, I think they upped that to like 25 terabytes per content database. So it's not that the site collection cannot handle multiple or even a tree of subsites. It's that the subsites, with especially inherit navigation turned on, would define your navigation. Yes, there's a way to override it, but it would define your navigation. And then if there was a hierarchy or org structure change within the organization, it became a pain in the butt to kind of move and shift these subsites to their new respective location, because now you're breaking links that were linked to content within that subsite. You're breaking bookmarks for those who had deep links within that subsite. So, it's just, a lot of badness that came out of it. So not only is your org chart is probably the worst representation of your navigation, because it's not going to be employee centric or employee, in the perspective or the context of the employee, is hinged on something that, one, you assume that everyone in the organization, those who's been there for a while and those who are new hire and consultants or contractors that you have working with you, they know the organization, they know what structure and the hierarchy of the structure and where to go to find certain pieces of information. I think that's just a big assumption and a bad assumption to make, right? So so outside of the assumption and then the inflexibility of being able, to handle reorgs within an organization, just mapping your navigation to your org structure is just a bad idea. Those are the pitfalls. We kind of understand why they are where they are. We have to stay fluid. We have to stay flexible. We have to look at things in the context of the employee. In the context of the employee, that's the piece that's really subjective. So what I went out and let's go ahead to our intranet. So if we look at our intranet, you will notice that, and we talked about this before when we were looking at building our building our homepage for our modern intranet and setting up our key site collections and establishing the hub network. So if you look at this homepage, you will notice that you have a section here. This is going to be your global navigation. Then you have a section here. This is going to be the local navigation. Now, if I click over to human resources, which is a different site collection within this hub, I get a new set of links for the local navigation for that particular site, right? So now if I click on the console, go back to the main site for this, and if you look at the footer area, there's also an area, so now you can now have footer navigation. So we navigate it out, right? We have a global navigation section, a local navigation section, and a footer navigation section. What type of information do you want to put in there? So what I'm going to do, let me pause this video. I'm going to go ahead and load up the links that I have based on this, fictitious intranet for Tesla. And once I unpause the video, let's walk through the global navigation, the links, the labels, the structure, and the thought process of why did I set the global up that way, what was my thought process for the local nav, and the type of information that I'm putting down in the footer and why those are there. So I'll pause this and then I'll come back and let's walk through and see what I came up with. All right, so let's take a look and see what I came up with as far as the navigation. So basically, I have this top level here, who we are, pay benefits, tools and resources, the help desk, forms, templates, and then maybe the departments or the models are considering that, I'm just guessing that Tesla may have their structure or their department set up based on the model car. Now, with this navigation, I started out, let me just share this with you. I started out with this Excel file, and this would be very similar to what you probably will kind of brainstorm or on the whiteboard. And one of the things I would recommend is to, when you're having this meeting, and I think we discussed this in the earlier part of the video, when you have this meeting, you don't want to go in there with a blank canvas. You want to go in there with something that you can jumpstart the conversation with, so that people can start throwing darts at, arranging, really starting to trigger some conversation, trigger some ideas, and don't go in married to this default structure that you have. Now, building out this mega menu top global navigation was actually pretty straightforward. There's a few gotchas in there. So if you take a look at the raw value, the raw structure is this long tree hierarchy, which is not bad, and you can come in here and you can modify these. So if you spelled something wrong or if you want to change the label, you can definitely change that. What I recommend, and what you will see, that most of these links are just to the public facing site, and part of that is because I just wanted to get the labels out there and the arrangement and the structure out there as quick as possible and not be too bogged down with the URL. Now, once you're, and this is probably a process approach that I would recommend, once you're comfortable with the labels, then go back in and then pepper in the right URLs for these respective items. But I think the label and the structure, the flow, in some cases, the layout is going to be important. Like, this mega menu here under pay and benefits only works because I have the same number of links under each header. And that's one of the things that I kind of struggle with, especially when you look at tools and resources where this is, double, right, expanded. You will notice that for each row, as you kind of land these out, it is just pleasing to the eye to have the structure. Now, and that's what, like, the best case scenario. And just know that this is responsive. So once once the browser or different browser resolution sizes, you may just get different layout. And so even though we try hard to keep everything even in this flow here, you would notice that maintenance and request, which was my last row, kind of creates that white space because it's just being shifted to a different column where the number of link sizes are different. So it's just one of those things that the balance really to try to please the eye is important. The labeling and the structure is important. The flow is really, really important in this case. And then also your header names. And these header names, they can be linkable, or they can just be headers that are not linkable. So you have that option behind the scenes. So that's just one of those things to keep in mind. I think the biggest piece that really kind of caught me by surprise was that once you're in this mega menu layout, you're forced to give it a header, or else the sublinks, which is like a third level. So this is your first level, this is your second level, and then everything under our core is considered the third level. Only the third level kind of get that natural link treatment. The second level gets that almost like a H1 or H2 type treatment. So if you just, like, say for example, I found myself making up this second level just to kind of get this third level to flow the way that I thought it should flow. Without this third level, what would happen is that you see how our core is rendered in that H1 tag. All of these would kind of get that same treatment, and it would treat them as column headers for the different columns, which is very, very odd looking. So when you're planning this out, just like, even if you just needed a single column, plan for this placeholder or like this column name, even for a single column layout, which I kind of struggled. Like, I didn't have that planned out here in this structure in my Excel file. All right, I think that's pretty much it. I mean, for the most part, it works, right? And if I'm linking to pay, which is a different site collection, but I started the same hub network, the same mega menu navigation flows with it, which is the promise, right? Any site collection that you add to this hub network is going to take on the global nav. Now, when it comes to the local nav, now that you're navigating through a separate site collection, understand that local nav is for that site, and the global nav is going to be stitched across site collection. So this local nav is something that you have to think about when you're building this out. From my experience with the mega menu, it actually there's actually a lot of room for a lot of links. Like, you can really expand out. I think that's why the time spent in planning is going to be well worth it and really allow this to flow. Because I think if you try to go in here ad hoc, it's going to look ad hoc and it's going to feel ad hoc. Whereas if it's like really thought out and you're really thinking out the journeys and things like, from a planning perspective, you will come up with a decent navigation structure. But this link here, I mean, you're looking at 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 21 links at the top, 1, 2, 3, 4, and then plus another 12. So I mean, this one menu, tools and resources, has 32 links, right? So I mean, now, just don't think of the navigation as linking to sites or subsites. I mean, you can link to individual forms. You can obviously link to individual pages, applications outside of SharePoint, documents that are made internal that may be outside of SharePoint. I mean, all of that is in play, and really just kind of think about, from an end user perspective, That's why the representation from the various departments becomes so important, because you have those, various departments going to have their perspective on what's the most requested. All right, so that's it for the mega nav. Now, when it comes to this local nav, to be honest, I really did not do a really good job with planning this out or thinking this through. Again, you just have so many areas that opportunities to put in links. So, really kind of think this through. I think the hardest one will be that main entry, because, when you have, to complement the global and try not to duplicate too many, or maybe highlight the 7 or 8 of those on the home page, is going to be key. But I think it gets easier, like once you link into a particular site, then you can say, okay, yeah, I couldn't represent these links in the global nav. These are other, respective links that you want to call out. But I think the hardest one that for me that I struggle with, and again, this is just me and my single perspective, but I think if I had other minds in the room, I think they'll, this probably would have flowed a little bit easier. But for me, I really struggle with what to put here on that local nav. Like sometimes you can put this, I've seen clients, put this in the context of the current user. So maybe you have like my documents where you link off to the OneDrive, or my sites where you link off to a page where you're doing like the recent sites for the current user. We talked through that, and you saw how we can configure that for in the web part properties itself. But, and also, from the waffle, you can link to teams. So you can say like my teams or my projects, link them off to here, my tasks, maybe link them to the planner board, and just make sure that those links are generic enough that once they click it, them being the current user, their respective items come up. And the OneDrive is the only one that I've seen that you have to be very careful with, because those links seems to be very tied to the current user, like my recent documents and things along those lines. All right, now when it comes to the footer piece of it, and I added some things since our last video, and I'll talk through those here in a bit. But when it comes to the footer piece of it, I was actually surprised that this was not a mega menu. I was expecting this to be a mega menu. This is just a single row navigation system for the footer. So, and to modify that, you just go to the gear icon, change the look, and then go to the footer section, and then this link here where you can go ahead and build these out. Now, when I was building out the mega menu, I had the option to promote or sub-promote or sub-link these various links here. They're all on one level, and you just kind of build that out there. So that, that kind of surprised me a bit. But when it comes to the footer navigation, these are going to be the links that, to be honest with you, people hardly ever navigate to the footer. So, I looked at other sites, and some of the type of links in here was like career, or like in the community, not necessarily technology advancement. I think that's more like a Tesla thing, since they're like on the bleeding edge within their industry. But like job openings, competitor analysis, maybe another touch on news. I don't know. But submit feedback was another key one that I seen. So I would say from these 6 or 7 links that you see here, I would say 4 of these are some of the most common ones that I've seen in the footer. But then again, for very custom intranets, these are almost not really mega menued out, but at least this type of structure to where you have 4 or 5 headers, and then underneath those headers, 5 or 6 different links that are related to that header. But here, with that single line, there's really not much you can do. But then again, I don't think you're going to be hurting for more real estate for links, especially with the mega. I really struggle with this mega menu. I was like, wow, you can represent a lot of information here, and it's beautiful because it's a snapshot, and it's really easy touch and go type of system. Now, in the next video, I do want to, as I was building this out, I was starting to document some of the gotchas. In the next video, we'll go over that. There's gotchas with that footer nav. There's gotchas with security, setting up security for sites within the hub network. There's a lot of questions on this create site option here. Who is that available to? Like what role does the current user have to be in to see this option? And again, this create site option allows you to create a site for the hub network. And if you navigate to another site within the hub, even though you're the owner, you don't see that option. So there's almost like a simulated like site collection admin or hub admin type role that's simulated. It's kind of implied because there's no explicit role for that. So we'll talk through that in the next video. And then I'm getting a lot of comments of, for the hub network or establishing the hub and stuff like that, where you don't see certain options and things along those lines. I may have a workaround. I'm still proving they're testing this out. So I may have a workaround on how you, even though your tenant may be set for standard release, how you as an individual may be able to see some of these key features and capabilities, even though your entire tenant is set for standard release versus targeted release, which is what I'm set to in order to see all these advanced, or not advanced, but coming soon type features. All right, so I'll talk through that. Oh yeah, and then we'll talk about this feedback here. These are standard Office 365 or SharePoint Online feedback or get the mobile app. When it comes to like your footer, oh yeah, that's a sneak peek on what's to come in the next video. But when it comes to your footer, you don't want you're grabbing feedback from your users into like either your Microsoft form or your Power App that you're creating, and you don't want your users to be confused with that feedback, right? So we'll talk about what are the options on what you can do to hide that. Before I let you go, real quick, so. Yeah, I set this up. I think we built this together. The one thing we did not build together was this form. And this is a Microsoft form here that you can grab a quick survey that I grabbed. So I mean, you can do a quick survey here using Microsoft Forms. I will go through the details on how to wire that up. And then lastly, this is just a quick image gallery on just to kind of show like images or what have you towards the end of the home page. So that's another piece that I added. I think that's about it. So again, I think there's a lot of mileage, and again, I think the key takeaway is that you have now you have this mega menu. You have all this rich functionality with news, events, weather, a survey form, recent documents, recent sites, personalization for the current user, an image gallery, all of this functionality with no customization, zero customization. This is 100% modern SharePoint, out of the box web parts, out of the box configuration, zero customization. Night and day what you get with SharePoint on-prem versus modern SharePoint Online. And I think it's ready for prime time. There are a few gaps in here. Like I think the audience targeting, like once the audience targeting piece come out, I think most organizations can live without it. But once the audience targeting piece comes out, I really think that it's going to be game over, right? I don't think there's no question that you as an organization, if you're already in Office 365 and you have E3 accounts, or at least E3 accounts in some form or fashion, there's no reason why you should not be taking a hard look at modern SharePoint. I think you can build things a lot quicker, less customization, it's easier to maintain, and it's evergreen. So the capabilities that we went through in this video, March 2019, fast forward 6 months, there's going to be a lot more capabilities. Even with the existing web parts, there's going to be a lot more capabilities, a lot more functionality out of the box. Okay, so that's it for this video. In the next video, we'll talk about the gotchas. And until then, hit me up in the comment section if you have any questions, concerns, scenarios that you would like to discuss through. Let me know in the comment section. I'll be more than happy to answer and get back with you. All right, until the next video, take care.